What's up? It's the mixtape era of PWNA, and today, Hayne and Jed are leading the way. A conversation about conspiracies with the authors of QAnon, Chaos, and the Cross. I'll let Hayne intro this episode here in a second. He didn't even take this intro serious enough to use a real mic. He used his phone. Nah, he's hanging with his boys out in the wilderness of West Virginia, so I'll just say we're lucky to be able to hear from him on the intro. And heck, it's the mixtape era. You never know what you're going to get. It's like the box of chocolates old Forrest Gump talked about. So real quick, on the B-sides in the show notes, you can click on a link to get access of it, but you have to pay some money. I just uploaded some new content. One, Jed, who you're about to hear, has tried many drugs. It's not something he's proud of, but facts are facts. And on the B-sides, he talks about cocaine for like 25 minutes. And if you've been keeping up with these episodes, you heard what Hayne drew on a pic of one of my daughter's faces and upset me. Well, we wanted to continue this conversation, the ins and outs of that whole ordeal, and part one of that continuing conversation is up on the B-side as well. So also next week, you'll hear a conversation that a lot of the PWNA crew had literally as a follow-up to a very insensitive blunder I made via text. A racial joke that I thought was harmless and hurt my friend Stoy. So after him and I talked about it one-on-one, the team discussed it as they all saw it play out as well. So you'll hear that conversation that we had to talk about the whole ordeal. And then the next couple of episodes, we talk Billy Graham rule with a couple of my former administrative assistants, including Liz. And then me, Amy, and Ellen have a debate about spanking your kids. Lastly, want to give you a heads up that conversation you're about to hear is also aired on Jed's podcast, Church and Other Drugs. You should give that podcast a listen. You'll love yourself some extra doses of Jed. I mean, you can even go over there right now and listen to this conversation that you're about to hear on this podcast and just go over there and listen to it. I'm not sure why you'd go through all that trouble, but you can. Hope you enjoy.
I demanded, pleaded, called God on promises and was like, you have to show up or I am done. And he did.
That's something to really think about. What does it mean that the God of the universe loves me?
Are we saying that our God is bigger than their God or what?
Man, you got my mind going crazy right now.
I just think that is evangelical bullshit.
And I don't fit in their box anymore. So feeling rejected from the church makes me feel far away from God.
If I'm living out the love of God, love of the divine, then in some ways we're unoffendable.
It's wrong to marginalize anybody for any reason.
Sometimes we can just have some things about our perspective that's off until we encounter someone who can challenge our thoughts, have conversations with us, and we just continue to grow and evolve.
I'm with you there. Yeah, I like that.
That sounded like womp, 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 womp to Rob.
I'm a hardcore gospel lover. I do love the gospel. I just think we get it wrong.
Girl, I was so highly medicated, I don't even know if you got to. Oh, found my people.
Hey guys, it's Hayne recording this with my crew, my boys, Asheville Fire Department, in a truck stop in wild and wonderful West Virginia. Maybe you're asking yourself, why are these guys in West Virginia? You know what? I'm not telling you why. I'm going to let you guys theorize why. I mean, the sky's the limit, right? Maybe they're just passing through. Maybe they're doing some type of fire service-related training. Maybe they're in a militia. I mean, they are in West Virginia. Kind of fun to let the imagination run wild. Make your theories. And speaking of theories, Jed and I jumped into a fascinating conversation recently with Michael Alston from Eastern Kentucky University and Gregory Bach from the University of Texas Tyler, both respected professors of philosophy and religion, about their new book, QAnon, Chaos, and the Cross. In this episode, we dip into why religious thinkers are more prone to believing conspiracies. Is it fair to classify groups of conspiracy theorists as cults? But most importantly, how do we live in love, harmony, curiosity, and peace without destroying relationships among the psycho nut jobs we ultimately love? So welcome to PWNA, the mixtape era. Troy, how was that truck stop bathroom?
Well, based off of the artwork inside the stall, I realized that we are not welcome in this area and we need to get out ASAP.
Yeah, we're getting out here.
Well, guys, we're super excited to talk to you guys. It's something that we've actually talked about here and there on the podcast. The mixtape version of Pastor with No Answers there's a team of us that are kind of working together, and we all come from different backgrounds. But I think this is something coming off the pandemic, especially, that is pretty hot, and we've all experienced it in certain ways. So before we just kind of jump in, if you guys would just kind of introduce yourselves, talk about your project, and then let's just get into the meat of it.
All right, I'll jump in. My name is Mike Austin. I'm a philosophy professor at Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond, Kentucky. And yeah, most of my work, like writing and speaking, is on ethics, cultivating character, that kind of thing. But I'm also interested in some of these kind of cultural, ethical issues. And so that's that, and a few other things kind of led me into this project with Greg.
And my name's Greg Bach, and I teach philosophy and religion at the University of Texas at Tyler. And like Mike, my area is ethics. And I got interested in this project on conspiracy theories. Actually, I've been interested in many years on this topic because I have friends who believe these things. And so that raises questions in my mind of how to talk to them and how to answer them and what I should believe for myself as well. So this is kind of a process. This book was a process of working a lot of that out.
Awesome. And how did you guys get connected to one another? Because you're in different spots.
Yeah, we met, I think, through an Evangelical Philosophical Society conference. I think the first time I went to, Greg gave a talk on Joseph Butler and forgiveness, if memory serves correctly. So then we started talking, and I actually had a friend of mine referred a publisher to me about this topic, like doing a single authored work, but I just felt like it was beyond I just didn't have the relevant expertise to write a whole book myself. And then Greg and I think Greg came up with the idea to do this edited thing. And so he had taught a class dealing with this for several years. And so, yeah, we sort of jumped in together.
Gotcha. So you guys got connected through this, what you call evangelical philosophical community?
Yeah, it's a kind of professional philosopher society.
Oh, cool.
If you have basically, just a couple theological commitments, and we've kind of gotten to know each other there, and some other philosophy conferences since then.
Gotcha.
Different organizations. So it's been good.
I always love meeting. This is the third. My name's Jed. I host another podcast called Church and Other Drugs, and recently too, I just spoke with another Christian philosophy professor, and I love the melding of those two worlds because, stereotypically in academia, it's like once you get into, the old joke, like once you start going to college, you stop believing in God, sort of thing. So it's awesome to meet Christian philosophy professors. That's very cool.
Yeah. Awesome. So you guys, this is a compilation of essays. And what is the time frame in terms of these being authored? Is this all stuff that's been written recently, or is this spanning over multiple decades of these essays?
Yeah, it's all recent. So we talked, Greg and I we talked about this, and sometimes they all were written just for this book. Sometimes you send out this general call for papers to people, but we decided to invite people first. And so anyone in the book is either somebody that we knew and invited or were referred to.
Gotcha.
And we, basically we just let people decide their topic. Sometimes we invited them on a specific thing they had expertise on. And if we already had somebody covering something, then we tweaked things so that there wouldn't be a bunch of overlap on the topics. But everything was written, gosh, I don't even know the timetable now. You know how time is these days, but within the last 2 to 3 years for the book.
All Christian authors?
Yes, and from a broad range of traditions. So some from sort of mainline, some evangelical, but so you can find, so that's one thing I actually like about it is from the theological and even political spectrum, people coming at the same issue, but with different commitments. So, but all with a kind of core commitment to the Christian faith.
Just as a extremely rough, broad baseline. So like going into this project, or I guess even this era of our culture, what were y'all's personal proclivities towards conspiracy theories in general on a personal level? Greg, you go first.
Well, for me, there's intellectual curiosity, but also, concern, because, the book is written by Christians for Christians. That was our aim here. And it's written as hopefully to be a helpful guide to people in the church who are dealing with this, either pastors or family members, people who are on the fence about it. We really wanted to really serve the church with this book. And so there's a lot of curiosity that motivates it. When we're talking, we can get into like the definition of conspiracy theories if you want, but conspiracy theories, they're fake, they're false ones, and they're ones that are true. So it's not as simple as, just saying, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, we can just dismiss that. So it's actually pretty complicated and makes for really interesting philosophical research.
Which ones would you, just off the top of your head, Greg, you say, well, this conspiracy theory is obviously bogus, but this one could be true or has some truth to it. Can you give us examples of some of those?
Sure. The standard example of a true one is Watergate. And I would say the false one is lizard people, for example.
Sure.
Sounds like something a lizard person would say, Greg. I got to be honest.
You got me.
I live in the mountains, Greg, so we're always hearing about Bigfoot. People are talking about Bigfoot all the time. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So when you guys started putting these essays together, was it really driven? Because Greg, you had mentioned that you've been interested in this for a while, but was it QAnon? Was it the pandemic? What really you guys decided, hey, we've got to put something out now, like this?
Actually,
tipping point.
Yeah, the book was in process, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, before January 6th. And so, it really got public attention. QAnon got public attention after that, but the book was in process before that. And wow. For me, it's just, having friends who believe these things. And they believed these things for years. And before QAnon, there's been conspiracy theories going on for decades, actually centuries. And so it's become a more recent phenomenon just because it hits the news now. And, of course, it makes a big impact with the insurrection of January 6th and all that. But having people that you love and care about believe these things really pulls you in.
Yeah, you could. A good argument could be made that Christianity itself was a conspiracy theory at one time, right? Like among the Roman Empire and sort of things, and among the Jews. So that's kind of what I was going to ask was, so, what are some more recent historical, because I had my broad question that I just have written down is like, what do we think is going on? And so dovetailing on that, it's like, is there a recent historical precedent of something pre-social media that could maybe compare to what is going on right now? I guess specifically we're talking about evangelicals, Western evangelicals buying into conspiracy theories. I guess we're funneling into that specificity. So yeah, can y'all think of any?
Yeah, I think one of the chapters in the book is by a historian who discusses some of this stuff, and you can kind of go back to when I was in high school, dating myself, there was sort of the satanic panic. It started before that, 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s. I remember I was actually, right after college, a missionary in Hungary for a year, which was awesome. But I remember my roommate, American, on the same team, got this, this was prior to email even, this copy of basically a Xerox copy of stuff about how Procter & Gamble was Satanist, right? They had satanic symbols, the owner, and it's like this whole thing. So there's that, and things like that have kind of trace, Greg mentioned centuries. There's even, it's hard to know if it's sort of conspiracistic thinking, even back in the, people blaming the Jews for the plague back in those days and stuff in the 20th century, right? There's a lot of, that Christians have fallen prey to right around, really around the Jewish people often, which is, strange historically and also obviously bad ethically speaking, but some of those things. And I think that, there are people kind of talk about this. Whether the 90s when Hillary Clinton said, the accusations against her husband were a vast right-wing conspiracy, when actually, They just were things that were happening. So you can find them claims right and the left. Nobody has like a monopoly on it, but some of those things jump to mind.
You said the word blame a couple of times, Mike. Do you think that is the core root? Are people looking to blame or to explain? But I don't know if this question is making sense.
Yeah, no, I think I think there is something there. There's like this. Yeah, I think there's fear. Often there's a good and evil kind of thing. So one reason that QAnon, I think, has maybe a little more plausibility for Christians and especially evangelicals is a lot of the language that's used is similar, right? It's this grand story of good versus evil. And look, we know as Christians there's evil in the world, both from humans and from supernatural entities, and even I would argue sometimes the language about the powers and the principalities in the New Testament includes sort of human powers, maybe systems or governments or those kind of things. So all that to say that, so I think there's something to that, right? I mean, and we see the world's not the way it should be, and we want to blame somebody. And sometimes these conspiracy theories give us a hard target, where in reality, we just can't know some of those things, right? Given our human limits. But I think that's a big part of it for sure.
Do you guys see that even in the scriptures? Because you were talking about some things in the past, decades ago, centuries ago, but are there places in the New and the Old Testament where you see the early church or you see the ancient Hebrew culture buying into this sort of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Does anything jump to mind for you, Greg? I'm trying to think.
Well, and what jumped to mind, I don't know if this answers the question, but one of the chapters, the last chapter in the book is entitled, Jesus was also conspired against, yet he was without sin. So, there's that. There's another chapter in the book that claims that all Christians are conspiracy theorists. And the idea in that chapter is that there's both a good and a negative side to it. Like the good conspiracy theory, we can get into definitions if you like, but the good conspiracy theory would be like the Trinity. The Trinity is a small group of three, that have a plan, a redemptive plan for all of human history. And that's a conspiracy of a sort, but a good one, right? But normally when we say conspiracy theory, it has a negative connotation. And so the example of that for Christians in the Bible would be something like the devil and his minions having this plan to whatever he's up to, right, would be a type of conspiracy theory. But the idea, Jesus was conspired against by, even members of his own group, right, to turn him over. And yet, how did he respond? And I think that's really where we want to go with the book, is to try to communicate, even despite all of these ideas out there, how should we as Christians respond? Even if some of them are true, most of them are not the ones we're talking about, but if some of them are true, how should we as Christians respond?
How should we? I'm sorry, Jed.
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, I like that as a follow-up question as well. It's so some of where I'm coming from, and this is my pure observed phenomenon is I early on in all the people I ran with, got into reading, I think when I was in middle school, reading Behold a Pale Horse and Bohemian Grove. And we were all into conspiracy theories, right? And we were the kooks out there believing this stuff. And then one day I looked up and realized that I was the sanest voice in the room. And I was very confused. And so since then I've been like, what? Because I remember this really blew my mind a completely rational, otherwise 42-year-old person that I was talking to, and just casually mentioned how, oh yeah, absolutely, Hillary Clinton drinks baby blood. And I was like, but you don't believe that? And she was like, no, that is true. And I was just like, oh man, what happened? How did this happen? Have y'all, through these essays, have y'all been able to distill a turning point? At what point did this start to go so sideways? And then a follow-up question too, and this is kind of philosophical, is what phenomenon, what is going on to where, to me, it seems so obvious, the warnings in the scriptures over and over about false teachers, false prophets, be careful, you're going to be led by persuasive language, and And it's like, to me, this movement of Christian nationalism and idol worship of specific individuals is so plain to me that this is wrong and you're being led astray. What kind of is going on behind the scenes that people are just unable to realize that? I mean, obviously you can't answer with any assurance, but just, something to ponder.
Yeah, just to speculate.
I think
Mike,
there's the first part of the question, there's sort of this confluence, and Greg can add to this too, obviously, but I think, the QAnon, like the first drop with 4chan was like 2017, and then it moved to 8chan. And so, but you've got that, you've got the Trump phenomenon, you've got the real or not a felt sense among many kind of conservative Christians, evangelicals, fundamentalists, that sort of this shift of political and social cultural power, I guess, even though maybe, all those things, so I think there's the fear, the insecurity, like the church in America, broadly speaking, has just been used to being comfortable, like having power, political, cultural, economic, it's not like the church of, the Paul under an oppressive empire. So sometimes I just feel like those things play into it. I think I'm actually working on a short book on Christian nationalism this summer, just kind of a 90, 100-page explanation and critique, because there's all this scholarship about it, but not a lot of, something that could actually help someone in the pews. And it's weird, the overlap between these two worlds, right? When you start looking QAnon and some of this Christian nationalism stuff. And so what's happened? Yeah, it's just, I look at it and I just think, how can you really think these kind of things when there's not only there's not any good publicly available evidence, but there's good counter evidence to a lot of these claims. I mean, QAnon predictions that have just proven false, and we just ignore it and go on. It reminds me of the end times people that come, that the world's going to end October 20th, 1994. Right. It doesn't. Yes. And it's just like, how do you engage someone rationally and on the basis of evidence when some people just seem beyond the reach of that?
And I think part of the appeal is in the maybe this is recent, maybe it's not, the marriage between evangelical Christianity and right-wing politics. And so you see that in recent years, and you also see, there's a chapter in the book called The Religious Rhetoric of QAnon, and that author, Chase Andre, brings out really, really clearly how, in an analysis of the Q drops, on how Q's using religious language, which really appeals to religious communities. He's using the language of spiritual warfare, which is something the church has been doing for a long time now. And that, I think, like you said, this false prophet who's catching people by appealing not only to the political associations, but also to religious language, is really confusing. It's hard for people to discern, and it needs clarity of thinking. It needs critical thinking in the church. And I think that's where philosophers can come in.
It feels very cultish. I mean, I feel like you almost just described, you have a definition of a cult. Would you classify something like this QAnon movement as a cult or cultish?
Well, I see what you're saying. I don't know if I would classify it as a cult, but it definitely seems to have that appeal.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar, like Q to like a David Koresh. I'm going to use very specific language that's tapping into very emotional places.
It's manipulative. It's manipulative.
Very manipulative. So maybe cult's too strong of a word, but
definitely cultish. I would say, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you in y'all's assessment, do you think it is? Did you watch Into the Storm by chance, the HBO documentary on the Q? That's a really good one if you have it. They lay out their argument for who they believe Q is. And I was wondering, do you think this is like the mind of just a very next level internet troll? Or do you think this is like a designed cultural dismantling attack from even potentially like foreign powers type of thing?
Yeah, that's just, I don't. Yeah, Greg, you go.
I don't have an answer to that. I think the chapter on the religious rhetoric of QAnon is a good analysis of it. And according to that author, it sounds like this is one or two people, right?
Yeah.
Whether there's a foreign conspiracy in it, I don't know. But it seems like, it seems like, and just the way it's described and the way I've seen it, it looks like it's just, there's a lot of people like Q out there spouting this stuff on these social media platforms. And just how it happened, Q's message started to get, the spotlight, and it took off. I don't know, other than the happenstance, how to explain that.
And how Mike said, I like what he said about the church had gotten comfortable. Do you think something like this is a necessary culling, like a necessary product of getting lax and comfortable, and something has to come along to kind of distill it down to, okay, we're going to find out, the sheep and the goats sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it's, I think the kind of refining and persecution and culling, as you put it, is a necessary thing in whether this is one of those or not. I think the important thing, and I guess in this sense, maybe yes, not that it's necessary, but it could be a good result. It's like, it's easy. It's kind of like the way evangelical, that term gets used these days, sociologists, it means more political. So people that self-identify that way, don't even regularly attend church services or something. So there's like this weird sort of cultural marker. Yeah. So I think it's part of that. I think it was easy to be a cultural Christian in America for so long, but now it's like, I think that's one thing that comes out in the book that wasn't even intentional, is a lot of these themes about humility, forgiveness, how to deal with anger. Jesus didn't retaliate when he was conspired against. It's like, C.S. Lewis, I love this phrase that, he wants to make us all into little Christs, right? That those virtues of Jesus, the intellectual and moral virtues. And so that's the proving ground. When you go to the Bible, it's the fruit of the Spirit as a result of genuine faith. And if the fruit of QAnon, it's not just kind of the weird beliefs. The guy in the past month that killed his 2 children because he believed they were lizard people in the Bay Area, I think it was. And the fruit of it is, often violence. And it's fracturing churches, families, I was on a call on a different thing last week where a pastor talked about basically losing his brother-in-law to this, originally QAnon, and then now he said he's like into stuff that makes QAnon look like child's play. So yeah, there are definite concerns about that. So I think for us, the motivation wasn't so much the culling, as you put it, although that would be part of it, but more just equipping people who are maybe entertaining these ideas, or who have loved ones who are into them, and just trying to help people deal with this issue, because it's not going away. That's the sad thing.
Right.
It's resurfaced now, and it's going to get stronger as the election comes.
Yeah. So that equipping piece, I think that's really interesting. And I think as people of faith, there is a moral and ethical piece in us that needs to be cultivated. I also feel like, as a history major, I graduated in 2000. So the internet was just kind of coming on the scene. But I remember taking a very specific class that this is how you do research. This is how you determine whether a piece of information is important, whether it has truth to it, or whether this is just some bogus idea. We were actually taught how to do critical research and thinking. So I think for this audience, we have that piece, which I'd love to hear you talk about as far as the critical thinking research piece. But what are the things ethically and morally that we should spend time cultivating within ourselves that will send those red flags up, so that, because I'm sure there's listeners that are flirting with some of these conspiracy, and they probably don't even know they're conspiracy theories right now. But that's a pretty long question. So maybe take at it first from a practical research piece, but then what's the internal piece as people of faith?
Yeah, maybe Greg can start.
Yeah, I think we can. Sure, I think we can both speak to. I think we're both interested in the intellectual virtues, and that's one thing that we can cultivate in our lives to help us discern truth from error. But the chapters that we contributed, Mike wrote one on humility, and I wrote one on anger. And I think this can speak to the moral concern, but also there's some overlap here because, in Matthew 7, it says you will know them by their fruit, and the trees produce good fruit. So this is moral and epistemology together. I think that's really, really key. But for me, in my research, this is my background as well as research in anger and forgiveness. So applying that to this project, I came to it thinking maybe conspiracy theorists have an anger problem. Through my research, you watch the videos on January 6th, and it looks like there's an anger problem going on, right?
Just a small one.
Just a small one. Right.
Smidge.
But through my research, I realized that it's both sides. I mean, you've got people in the church who believe conspiracy theorists, and they're very angry, and sometimes things can get very heated. But on the other side as well, you've got people who dismiss these people. They're upset that they're tying the gospel to politics, or tying the gospel to, I don't know, flat earth theory or something else like that. So there's this contempt on the other side. And so it was interesting just to explore that and to really see, if it doesn't even, it's not even just conspiracy theories, it's politics in general or any other area. If anger rises to a certain point, it interferes with our ability to love our neighbor and our enemy. And that should be a sign that something's gone wrong. If you're listening to people that are telling you not to love your neighbor or kill your enemy or whatever, that's a clear sign you've wandered into falsehood.
Yeah. How about those practical pieces too? Like, for example, 20 years ago, you kind of knew if something had credibility because it was put out by a university press. Like, you could actually read, but now, particularly with social media, Twitter looks the same, no matter if it's a university putting it out or it's Q putting it out. It has the exact same look and feel. How would you encourage listeners, if you're flirting with an idea that sounds pretty crazy, but if is touching something in you, how would you encourage them? Like, what sorts of research should they be doing before they just buy into something like this hook, line, and sinker?
Yeah, there's a sort of critical thinking piece to that overlaps actually some with my chapter on humility. And I think the critical thinking piece is, we do have a chapter in the book about like evaluating sort of stuff online, but like looking at the source doesn't, just because someone's an expert doesn't mean they're infallible, but there's certain kinds of they're just ethical and critical sort of rational standards of research that go on. So if somebody's, you can trace back a source, someone's making a claim about politics and it's someone who this is their life's work, that's more plausible than, nothing against insurance agents, but some insurance agent who just does a bunch of research online. So the source is you want to trace it back. Is the source credible in the sense of somebody who, the research is vetted? It doesn't mean you can't quote unquote do your own research, but
couldn't that even be as far as, like, for example, I had a small business at one time. We used to joke, "Hey, let's just put out voted number one." Voted by who? Our wives voted we're number one. So we're going to put voted number one to create some sense of false credibility. How do we even sniff that out, Mike?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think we just, I've even in the past week, I saw something on Twitter. I don't even remember the topic, but it struck a chord in me. I was like, yeah. And then I was like, well, now wait a minute. Here's a picture. Here's somebody. I have no idea who this person is. I'm not going to retweet it or, and I didn't want to spend the time to drill down and figure out. So I just left it. But I think that's really what happens a lot. Like you said, there's an emotion gets struck. But that's one thing we should do is whether it's really positive or really negative, that's not a red flag, but it is just like it should be, we want to train ourselves where that's a reminder, okay, I feel this way about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's true or false. I need to look into it a little bit more. And I guess I would say the humility part is important here because I think Christians and in America, in one sense, there's like this anti-intellectual history we have, and that it's good, and that there's like this independent thought thing that's part of that. But the bad part is we think we know more than we do. And so the humility is just like, we're all fallible. I could spend the next 20 years researching, I don't know, something about the 2020 election or particle physics, and just it's outside of my area of expertise. I shouldn't have strongly held beliefs about stuff like that. So I think humility says, it's okay to suspend judgment. And if it's something that really matters to me that I think is important, then that's worth drilling down, looking at publicly available evidence. That's a key thing for me, is a lot of these claims are just made. And I have had people point me to websites and things about the 2020 election conspiracies there. And then I do broader research once or twice, and there are pretty clear explanations from reputable sources that's publicly available evidence. I'm like, this is just, it's not good. So we've got to learn how to, just because someone says something doesn't make it evidence. And it can sound really plausible. You can tell really plausible stories about things that fit how things appear. But then when you go one layer below, it's like, but these are just empty claims that don't have any grounding in fact. Now you can't, so think about, this is an example I've used from the past 4 years. There's good evidence because they found memos and emails that CNN was trying to kind of do anti-Trump stuff for a while. And then, of course, we know more recently, same thing with Fox, all the texts and things with Tucker Carlson. So that's publicly available evidence. We can all see it. And yeah, those things happened. But we don't have that with a lot of the QAnon stuff or a lot of these conspiracy theories where it's just this really intricate story, but it's not evidence that publicly available we can look at together and vet and interact about. They're arguments, but they're not, they're kind of free-floating without any foundation. So I think that's one key thing. Or a few key things, actually.
Yeah.
I guess one other thing that made me think of this this is something that I think is for all of us, like the humility part's not just for people who buy these things. For someone like me who tends to be more skeptical, and rather than just when someone says, well, I believe, someone in the pew next to me says, I think that, well, I don't know, the lizard people thing's so out there, but some sort of QAnon belief, and instead of me just saying, oh, that's ridiculous and dismissing them, humble myself, engage them about that, right? If someone I've got a relationship, I'm willing to do the work, right? If they're willing to think through things together and rather than just argue, but work together to figure out what's true. But if the things I believe about conspiracies, if all these sort of weird, what we might think of as initially as weird beliefs, if they tend to actually just affirm everything I already believe about politics, theology, that's kind of a red flag that maybe every time that I go against the consensus of experts, whether it's conspiracies or the efficacy of immunizations or whatever, if it always fits my pre-existing beliefs, that's a red flag that maybe something is going on here besides just an honest seeking of the truth. And that's for all of us, right, to think through.
Yeah. And another practical thing is there are paid news sites, but there are a ton of, and I guess you have to say that you're trusting these sites, but there are a ton of really good paid news sites that will give you a breakdown of the biases of the articles. So it'll either have a pie chart, it'll either have a bar thing and be like, this is da 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 da. So I have a hopeful prediction and a massive fear about going into this election and AI and what's going to happen. Did y'all happen to see the Pentagon bombing tweet that made the stock market drop 45 points in 6 minutes? And it was an AI generated image, and it got shared through a Twitter account called Bloomberg something. It was a verified Twitter account that was made to look like Bloomberg News. It was a picture of the Pentagon smoking, and 500 billion in the stock market was, wiped out in minutes. It came back, but it's like, okay, this is going to be an issue. So my hopeful prediction is that perhaps and once again, we're going to hit a zenith of it's going to get worse before it gets better, but maybe we are going to have a great reset about the things that we trust online. And this is my hopeful prediction, is that it is, AI generated content will become so ubiquitous that you just cannot trust what you read and see on the internet. And hopefully, most likely after years of falling for it, people will be like, okay, or we'll have to come out with, some sort of blockchain watermark system for actual images. But like this stuff is coming. It's happening. It's happening now. Did you see the pictures of Trump being arrested that were AI generated? Yeah. There's just, and like that was shown to me from a client I worked with. He was like, Trump got arrested on Tuesday. I was like, this was before he got arrested. I was like, no, he didn't. He's like, yeah, he did. It's right here. I was like, oh no, like that's not real, my friend. That's a scary thing coming into this next election. It will be the next big issue, right? So I'd like you to touch on that. And then from a philosophical perspective, I had this discussion with a Christian the other day on Facebook about politics as well, where I kind of posed the question. He was talking about, voting for a particular person. And I was like, as a Christian at this point, is it not more ethical to simply withdraw and just not participate? Is that an ethical option for Christians? That if I don't support the system in general as it stands right now. So is it morally and ethically okay, and spiritually even, to just say, I'm just going to bow out? I don't want to participate at all.
Well, I don't know what you mean by bow out. Just not vote. I see.
Yeah.
Because I think as Christians, we're called to engage the culture. And I know there are Christians out there, Christian authors, Dreyer, who says we should withdraw now because there's a coming storm or something like that. I just don't think things are that bad yet that we need to withdraw. I think we still need to be engaged. Voting, I get why some people don't vote. The lack of options, really. But that even if you chose to do that, I don't think that should extend to your disengagement from culture, and especially loving your neighbor. I think that would be problematic. To your point about AI and concerns about the inability to know for sure, I think this is just to Mike's point into his chapter. We as Christians, or just in general, need to be more humble. And this isn't something that's new. Go back to David Hume and his skepticism. People believed all kinds of things. They still do. They believe things that don't have evidence, and we just need to be careful with our thinking. And I think maybe this is a call to the church and others to revisit what it means to think carefully about things, to be critical thinkers. In the book, it also talks about biblical illiteracy. That's another issue. But I think as philosophers, what we can do is contribute to critical thinking in the church, and this would be maybe a call for that.
Yeah, and I understand I think I agree with Greg. Well, I'm sure I do about the engaging culture, but the voting thing, I don't have a problem with somebody saying it goes against my conscience to vote for either candidate. So voting a third party or write in or just not vote for it. I think that's a live option. There's of course Anabaptist tradition, right? That would,
what is that?
So just the sort of like the nonviolent, the peace churches like Quakers and others who are, they're kind of, I don't know if withdrawing from culture is a fair way to say it, but at least they're not caught up in the political stuff like voting, like we are. Like they would not vote for either just because they think either is an agent of violence. And I was talking to my wife yesterday. It's like here we are again, where it's like Biden and Trump, or maybe Biden and DeSantis, or who knows what will happen. But it's just kind of like, it's really hard for me to get excited about either option, and I have some really deep concerns about some. And I've been a registered Republican, Democrat, and independent over my 30 years of voting, whatever, and I'm just staying independent. But yeah, I think it's a hard question because it's one that we have that so many centuries of Christians didn't even have to grapple with, right? They just didn't live in a democracy. It's just kind of the government is what it is, the king or the empire, and we had a good chance of being, until we kind of made common cause with empire, starting with Constantine and then different governments since then. So yeah, the AI thing, I really hope we just get to a point where it's kind of like where online stuff that's not vetted is sort of like the National Enquirer, was in the 80s and 90s, where it's just like everybody knows it's not true, but some people kind of just buy into it, where most of us are like, well, that's just not credible. So yeah, there's going to have to come a point, you hope, either where it's just like informational chaos, like utter chaos, or yeah, like you said, there's got to be some kind of vetting or
It feels like we're in chaos
thing.
right now. It feels very much like chaos.
Yeah. The thought that it could be worse with generative AI is a little bit scary, or a lot scary.
This once again, wildly speculating, but really not even that wildly. We're, especially within the next year, we're at a point where videos will come out of Trump and Biden doing and saying things that they did not do or say.
Yeah.
And that's a big, big problem.
Yeah.
I wanted to, so on kind of the voting thing, this is a quote of Jesus's that is often thrown into the ring in these kind of conversations. And I just wanted kind of your simple interpretation of it when he says, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Some people will take that as, don't even worry about the government. Pay your taxes, just kind of live your life. Don't even worry about the government. How do you philosophically interpret that? Or how should, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, the immediate context has obviously to do with taxes, but maybe you can draw like a more, I think Christians over the centuries have drawn from that and elsewhere that there is an obligation, right, to the government to, people who are ideally at least supposed to be servants for our good, right, sort of providing order, security, benefits to citizens. So, as long as it's just, and we participate and cooperate. But I guess to me, it would be a step too far that based on that, you're obligated as a Christian to vote. Because, what if it was like, some dystopian future where you've got two, where the two major party candidates are basically going to be, I don't know, mini Hitlers or something like that. It's hard to say I'm obligated as a Christian to vote for one of them. So I think there's got to be like some kind of boundaries around what that would mean. And if the federal the federal elections are so bad, that doesn't preclude me from voting in my local elections or participating in local politics or, all the sort of things that can make a difference where we're at. We moved here in 2004, so going on 20 years, this Richmond, Kentucky, smaller town, about 35,000. But we've been here long enough now that we know, go anywhere, we know people usually. And we're starting to be able to have a positive impact through our church and the community. And that's good, right? That's what Christians should be doing. So we don't want to, I'm with Greg. It's, I don't want to withdraw and just have a separate Christian everything. We already have too much of that. I would argue we need to actually be in relationship with people in our communities, making a difference. And then who I vote for president is important, but it pales in comparison to how I treat my next door neighbor or how I help my city deal with homelessness or drug addiction or job stuff or whatever. So
I think there's room to disagree about whether we should vote and our obligations in the public sphere there. I think what that passage, I think Jesus is not writing in the context of a democracy. And so your application to our situation is stretched here, right? But also in 1 Peter, he's talking to a church that is persecuted, and he says, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. He goes on to say, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the emperor. So it seems like the message of the New Testament is specifically to the church. It's not for them to be involved necessarily in political affairs. That's not to say we shouldn't be, but the focus is that we should be about our business, which is the kingdom business, and that other stuff's going to take care of itself. I think this speaks a lot to the conspiracy theorists, to the QAnon followers who are bringing together this religious language, the religious understanding, and these political ideals and agendas. I think that's where this language is applicable here. It's saying, don't get your priorities out of whack. Our first call is to love God and love our neighbor. After that, we can vote however you want to vote, with your conscience. But it seems like when you watch January 6th and you see the QAnon shaman praying in the Senate chambers, you think something's gone wrong here. Something's missing, right? Somebody's priorities are out of whack. And I think that's where these passages help us.
Bring in Dan, because you both have mentioned the word community a lot in that local piece. And I think that's so vitally important. and even as spheres, we have our zip code, our zip codes, and then we move into our more inner circles, and engaging that community. For folks that are listening that may be in a church community, or they see their church community, that tighter community, moving into these areas. First, two questions. First off, what are your recommendations for how do we humbly love that community? How do we engage them and talk about these types of things in a way that is not requiring them to defend themselves and take hard stand? My father had a saying as a kid, be careful what you make somebody defend, because if they defend it too hard, they will own it. Their pride, their lack of humility will not allow them to ever come off of the thought. They will just entrench themselves into it. So how do we engage? Let's just start the small level, these at faith level, our faith communities. How do we engage folks that are moving that direction in a way that with humility and love? But then where's the tipping point where it gets so toxic? It's we have to remove ourselves from those small communities.
Well, at first, I think we have to make the commitment to engage. This is one topic that we're not doing, at least very well. And so when you have somebody in the pew next to you who believes these things, and that person, I think the first chapter in our book speaks to this well. You want to listen. I think we've already mentioned this. But the second step is you want to praise. It means you want to say, what is it about that point of view that they get right? What is, like, their concern for the nation or their concern for falling prey to falsehood or something like that would be something that a conspiracy theorist might do well. But then you don't stop there. You have to move in. You have to press in. That's the third step. So you want to press in with an open mind. You want to take their views seriously. What I find many non-conspiracy theorists doing is just dismissing it. Like, I don't want to talk to those people, even though they might be members of my church. I don't want to engage that. So we don't even do that. Or we're on the other extreme, right? Your church just is, a supporter of those points of view. So that would be, I think, the first step.
Yeah, and then probably you should just buy our book for everybody in your church.
Nice.
No. Yeah. So Greg and I can,
shameless plug. I love it.
That's right. Yeah, buy a beach house or something. No, you don't get rich off philosophy books, but and that's a joke, but
I love it.
I think there's this I lost my well, basically, I think the engaging part's important. Now, when does it become like go too far? Like for me, if it's someone in my church, I'd engage them. But for me, the tipping point is when we're talking and like Greg said, we affirm and press in. And I say, why don't give me something I can read or watch that you think like really is a really excellent example of a solid argument for what you're thinking here. And I do that, and we interact. And then I want them to reciprocate, and I give them, kind of a counter argument I've found in a book or online or something. And when someone's not willing to, like, if I'm willing to read their stuff and then they're not willing to read my stuff, it's hard to know where you go from there, because I think we want to point it away to where we're face to face trying to have this argument to a picture where we're side by side trying to figure out what's true together. And so if I can come with somebody with openness and humility and say, look, maybe. And it could be this is the rare occasion where there's a real conspiracy here, right? And if that's true, I'd want to know it and try to engage. But if not, then you want to walk with somebody through some of those hard issues. But if people just aren't willing to engage, it's hard to know what to do. And if I was in a church, like what's the guy, Greg Locke in Tennessee, who's he spouts a lot of this QAnon stuff. He's like gone off on Biden and the Democrats as demonic mongrels who are pedophiles. I mean, just all this stuff. Like if my pastor started doing that, I'm gone. I mean, because that's not the gospel, right? That's just something else.
A major leadership issue, in the community.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, I think the danger of this stuff, that all this, the politics, the Christian nationalism, conspiracy theories, this even goes back to the give to Caesar thing, is that one of my real concerns is that this becomes all consuming and we're not doing the kingdom work of loving our neighbor, of helping in our community, and of engaging in politics as well. But people go down these rabbit holes where they're spending all their emotional and intellectual energy on other stuff. and the person their next door neighbor or their people in their family need their presence, and it's not there because they've gone down this rabbit hole.
And that's so. I don't know where, as men of learned science, you fall on the subject of powers, principalities, background spiritual warfare sorts of things. But it's a pet theory I've been working out for many, many years, but I truly do not believe that people are inherently dumb, that they're stupid, that they're just easy to get the wool pulled over their eyes. Sometimes
you do not believe that, Jed? You don't?
I don't.
Interesting.
I mean, that's a bold statement to some, but
sure, I would disagree. But keep going.
By that, what I mean is people do not do things without a payoff, and if there is such a thing as spiritual warfare, if there is such a thing, I mean, you can use different language for it if you want, ego, whatever. There is some sort of background, internal, spiritual, mental payoff for people engaging in these things. And if there is some sort of power that is plugged into it, there's like, I mean, when you look at movements and cult movements and stuff, it seems like this wave of energy. And I mean, do you kind of get am I explaining it correctly? But it's like, what do you see? Like, can we point to a hunger and payoff for believing these things? And if so, like, how do we feed them the right thing? If they're circles, what is the square hole that they're trying to jam themselves into? And like, how do we point them to the square?
Yeah, I think part of like what leads people to get into this stuff, it's a good thing about us being God's image, bearing God's image, and that we humans, at least part of us, that image bearing part, naturally desires truth. We want to know things, right? That's part of how God constructed us, to know Him, to know the universe He made, creation, those kind of things. And then this is just one of, like all of our God-given faculties, they can go wrong or be directed at the wrong things or be distorted or, yeah. And look, I think there is really a demonic realm. I take those parts of the Bible to be like indicating that Satan is real, demons are real. As I said earlier, I think powers and principalities can also mean kind of systems taking on their own life. But yeah, the payoff is that, we want to be in the know, right? Like we like to be, this is the negative part. So I know what's really going on, right? I'm not one of the sheeple, or, people can get really extreme about this where pride comes in. The payoff. Yeah. What is the payoff? Because I think it's a similar thing to like you see with people that get obsessed with end time stuff. There's like this similar pattern of obsession and like getting at the truth, but then, yeah, I don't know. Greg might have thoughts. I kind of struggle with that.
I mean, it could be like as simple as, I'm a Saints fan. It's like this. It's like my team is winning. I mean, I guess there probably is just some very, very basic, I'm in, you're out. Therefore, I will succeed socially in my pack of primates. I mean, yeah.
I think the I am, you're out though, Jet. I think you're onto something as far as the payoff. So I work as a firefighter. I'm a professional fire captain in the city of Asheville. And I see this happening all the time with groups of people. Groups of people just want to belong. And one of the easiest ways to belong is to have a pessimistic view together. And I call it, I teach guys, I call it the power of false, or the power of negative intimacy. Let's decide somebody, whether it's a chief, whether it's a battalion chief, someone that we don't like, something that we think is wrong, and let's create a narrative about it so that we can just feel close to one another. It's a way to feel close. I think I can't remember the name of the neurologist, but he says he calls negative thoughts Velcro and positive thoughts Teflon, and that we know in neurological science that a negative thought, it takes less than a second for our mind to latch onto it, to think about it, but it takes over 20 seconds for us to have a positive thought, a constructive thought. We have to sit in it for over 20 seconds before it really takes a part of our mind, of our soul. But I think that the power of that negative piece, that's the point, is that, at least in my experience, when folks have a common enemy, or when folks sit at a table, and I call it sport bitching, they can sit and they just sport bitch together.
Yeah.
It has no real goal. There is no payoff other than the fact that the sport bitching is an itch that they just like to scratch.
Yeah.
And they're all scratching it together, and it's like poison ivy. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Do you think that could be a potential payoff? Even
That's really, yeah. I think that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, a negative community, but I think it matches up with what we see in Christian circles with this culture war mentality, right? It's us versus them, and this my team, right? This is my team, and I think the Bible, I mean, there is spiritual warfare talk in the Bible, but what we've done is, I mean, it's one thing to talk about the supernatural realm and what's going on there. It's another thing to put a name to it, whether it's a real or fake, secret society, and say that's what we're working against. So I get the appeal of that, but I also think what I've identified in the last few years is just the evangelical churches I've grown up with have been full of this culture war rhetoric. And I think this plays into this, and this is not a helpful idea. I think we're now seeing the results of that. But who doesn't want to be on the side of the good, right? In a battle for all eternity, that we're on the winning side. We are on the winning side, but what does that look like? And nowadays, this looks like we're fighting whatever conspiracy theory, and that just seems wrong.
Mm-hmm. And all of that, I agree with. And then it really was a perfect storm. Then you compound it with people had literally 2 years to do nothing but sit online and work themselves up themselves up. I mean, it's just like, oh goodness. And I think, there may be, I can't remember who it's attributed to, but we are a generation without a united struggle. We didn't, we had Afghanistan, but that was far from a united struggle, right? We have not had our World War II. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying we did not have this united common enemies, and we are, we have it made. We're a first world country where I can press a button and whatever food I want comes to my house. So I think these are the things that just reaffirm Christianity to me, because it's just, to me, it's so obvious to see the human condition in action. And it's like, okay, you give me everything that I need and could possibly want, and I am still dissatisfied, and I will still find a way to marginalize, to other someone, to be hateful, to be selfish. And it's just like, okay, so the cure to what ails me is not physical. It's just not. And it blows my mind how obvious it can be sometimes. And yet I'm still, I will go and be selfish in about 2 hours. It's like I'm not immune to it either. It just reminds me that I need, an intermediary savior. I need a spirit to kind of cure me of this. But yeah, I think everything all of y'all said, I think it's almost like we are reaping what we have sown culturally, and this is just kind of, unfortunately, it might just have to get to a point of critical mass, and then hopefully, we'll get another 100 years until the next one, until the good Lord comes back, and that's just.
So Greg and Mike, this is a personal question for you guys. Do you guys have any personal experience in buying into these things in your past? Is there anything? Does that make the question make sense? Or can you speak from your own experience? Put you on the spot.
I can't. No, I'm just trying to think. Like, I think for a little while in the 80s. So I grew up Roman Catholic and became an evangelical as a senior in high school without knowing that's what I was doing through young life. And so I think for a while there, I always like Greg mentioned, I was always sort of averse to the culture war. Well, not always. Pretty soon became averse to the culture war mentality.
Sure.
But I think there are times where it was easy to identify Christianity with certain political views, and of course there are things that fall out of our faith. But I remember like being a newlywed and going to church, and like the Christian Coalition voting guides would be hand passed out as you walked into church and some of that stuff. So I think I always had a little bit of skepticism. So I can't think of a time where I was like, this is a conspiracy. But I think there are times where I probably would have been more susceptible to that if somebody had like made a case for it.
Right.
For me, it's more, even today, like I've got friends from church who we haven't discussed it in depth, but in passing, when the mention that I was working on this book, they're like, well, is it kind of pro or con? I said, well, it's mostly skeptical. And I could tell by their reaction that maybe they were hoping for something different.
Right.
Or another.
They wanted some support.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm like, well, another guy said, I kind of tend to think there's always conspiracies going on. And I'm pretty non-confrontational in certain ways, unless, just, so I didn't like drill down with him then. Maybe we'll have a conversation now that the book's out. But yeah, for me, no, not really. That I can think of.
You're in the hot seat, Greg.
Right. So conspiracy theories, no, I don't think I ever. Well, again, like Mike, when I started in my faith journey in the 90s, talk radio was a big thing. That was when that started.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like part and parcel. You became a Christian, you started listening to talk radio. So if that's the closest I got, I think. But then, and I was like, wow, this is I started to buy into some of that right wing stuff, and it wasn't until maybe a decade later that I started to realize there are more political perspectives in the church, and I started to stop just listening to one side, which was an echo chamber in the 90s. And now we've got different echo chambers, but they're still echo chambers. And I think that's the challenge, is to expose yourself to other perspectives, especially within the church. It's not just all one political point of view. And my political journey has kind of gone from one extreme to, back and forth, kind of like a pendulum. I consider myself in the middle now, but to other people, I'm probably, I don't know, conservative or liberal.
Sure.
Who knows from what perspective, but not about conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Hearing you guys in this conversation earlier, I think for me, and it's the pitfalls. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm the natural contrarian about almost everything that pushes me to a place of deep cynicism. So I'm almost the opposite side of the same coin. Like neither is helpful. Neither is doing anything positive, to the conversation. So yeah, this has been really an interesting conversation for me to say, okay, because I'm the guy who would just immediately dismiss. Oh, well, that sounds, of course, lizard people sounds ridiculous, but even just my natural cynicism is like, oh, that's got to be bullshit. There's no way that's accurate. There's no way that that's true. So much, in fact, I'll be so cynical that I will just dismiss the relationship, to say I'm just not going to entertain this person anymore, and I miss a huge opportunity to have a conversation, just like as you guys were sharing earlier. So for those of us who have friends and family who are into this, how can this specific book, because I know we're kind of running on the end of our time here, how can this book be helpful to them? And how do we introduce these essays without, hey, just read this?
Yeah.
No relation. How do we properly introduce something like this?
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe depending on what's going on with the person, maybe just like if you're going to use this book, just pick one and to start there, then just say, here, read this. Like maybe you could read one together and see what their reaction and give yours. But I think one thing the book has, there's a communication professor that talks about this, like another approach. So there's the first chapter Greg mentioned that talks about how to engage someone who maybe is into this stuff. They're really specific, clear, practical. It's called, I can't remember the name of the chapter. It's Tim Muehlhoff is the author of the chapter, but he talks about his own experience, a colleague who, when she found out he was going to get, I think it might've just been a flu vaccine. I don't even think it was COVID. But this just was like kind of freaked out on him. And his point was he could affirm her concern for his well-being. Like, if I believe this was dangerous, I would want to tell my family and friends too. But they've been able to engage over it and maintain a good relationship. But it's basically, find out what they think and why with openness, kind of share what you think and why, affirm what you can affirm, the common ground, make the relationship central, and don't make the relationship hinge on this. So there's some practical tips there. But I think too, and this goes back to the other question, I've become more and more convinced that a big part of this that draws people to these kind of things is that need for community, right? So that means that there's something going on in a lot of or something not going on in a lot of our churches. And it's more difficult in the U.S., I think. Like I've shared this a few times. Greg's heard me say this probably 4 or 5 times now. But like we've become part of a church plant in our town, about 2 years old now. But it's been intentional to live in the same pockets. So there are like 5 or 6 families that live within, half a block or a block of each other here downtown. So we're like we're actually like have community on a daily basis with people. And I think a lot of Christians are looking for community in Christian nationalism, or in this, or QAnon group, or end time stuff. But God's already provided a community. It's not a nation. It's not QAnon. It's the church, right? So can we foster that in our churches? Because to me, that's a big, maybe this is I'm not trying to be snarky, but a kind of an immunization against some of this bad thinking is in community. With each other, where I've got checks and balances, and where I start thinking something that's off, my brothers and sisters can reel me back in, and we have that kind of openness and deep relationship where that can happen. So anyway, those are the things that jump to my mind about it.
I don't think this book is something you hand to a conspiracy theorist and just say, read it. I don't think that's...
So I shouldn't just send this to Jed today.
Yeah.
Right.
Jed, I got something I want you to read, buddy.
Yeah, I think it's something that you could read with somebody who's on the fence or really wrestling with it. But in my mind, when we created this book, I thought it would be a toolkit for church leadership, for pastors, for families, for people who have people they know and love who are in this stuff. And I think that's what it's designed to be. I mean, there's a nice appendix in the back that has like logical fallacies that you can identify to avoid. So there's lots of great things. And like Mike said, there are contributors in the book from all different disciplines: communication theory, history, biblical study, lots of philosophers. So all kinds of things to meet all kinds of needs. But yeah, I don't think it's something you just hand to somebody and say, read it.
And I gotta say, in the coincidences of all coincidences, I was just re-skimming through the contributors, and Dominique Turnipseed is my high school good buddy that I have not seen him in 16 years. So I was like,
wow,
no
awesome.
way. Yeah, good old.
That's
so
wild.
Dom, if you're listening, what's up, buddy?
Yeah, Dom, you may want to give Jed a call. He's kind of getting off the rails here.
I'm getting off the rails.
That's right.
Put me back on. That's so funny.
Yeah, so I don't know if we've actually said the title. The book is QAnon, Chaos, and the Cross: Christianity and Conspiracy Theories. Guys, where can listeners find you? Where can they purchase this book? But then where can they find you, like specifically, if they want to follow in on the work that you're doing?
Yeah, the book's kind of, all the standard places: Amazon, the publisher, Indie, anywhere you can buy books. For me, probably I kind of keep Facebook for like people I actually sort of know, but I'm on Twitter at Michael W. Austin. So I talk about my work a lot there. I've got a website, same thing, michaelwaustin.com. And yeah, I do like engaging people in that forum. The one, if it's like random anonymous trolls, I just tend to ignore or block, but none of your listeners are like that. So
there's not a single person that I always call a troll.
Except Jed.
It's such a broad listener base, guys. Like it's wild.
Yeah, exactly.
Except for Jed.
Yep.
It's such a broad listener base. I mean, we from conservative, even right wing, from evangelical to Catholic to a lot of folks they've walked away from their faith, but there's still something that they're, and a lot of folks, a lot of their disillusionment are things like this that have happened, consistently through their faith journey. And they've just like, I'm out, but they're still here. So I'm loving that we're bringing voices like yours because it's just going to reach such a large community. How about you, Greg? Where can folks connect with you? And are you accepting trolls?
I'm not yet on social media in this way, so that might change in the near future. But I've got several other edited volumes on anger and forgiveness. So if that's something that your listeners are interested in, I recommend looking me up on Amazon.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Jed, you got anything else for these guys?
No, really enjoyed it. That was super fun.
Yeah.
That was super fun. Thank you for indulging all my queries. I really enjoyed it.
It was very challenging for me. I really appreciate you guys because I come from the opposite side of the coin, really. I can be too cynical. So it's a gut check for myself. So thank you so much. When we close out, if you can leave your browser up, it's going to upload for about 30 seconds, just getting all of our audio uploaded. And then either Joey or one of us will let you guys know when this thing airs, so you guys can let your people know when it's going to be coming out, and you can post it over your social, Mike, and we can just start gathering your trolls.
That's right. That's good.
Sounds great.
Guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, appreciate it. It was good.
Thank y'all.